Veterans Breakfast Club, and we're part of the History Project, which is where we record veterans stories, and then we'll have those recordings posted on the veterans website, and they're going to be available to friends, neighbors, family, and anyone else that wants to view. Today we're talking with Sal. Now I'm going to make sure I get your last name correct. Marranca.
Yes.
Marranca. Sal Marranca served in the U.S. Army, and I'm going to let him tell you about his story. So why don't we start with how did you go into the service? What age were you, and why did you choose the branch that you chose?
Well, I'll first say I can't believe it's over 50 years ago, but it is, and it was, and it never leaves your mind, both in positive ways and others. I went into the service at the ripe old age of 21 after I just graduated from Bethany College in West Virginia. And I knew at that point in time, with everything going on in our country, as I often tell people, if you can walk and chew gum at the same time, you were going to be drafted. So I knew it was going to happen. After 4 years of being in college and playing football, I thought I knew all the answers, and I found out I didn't. I was drafted by the U.S. Army, so I didn't choose the service. And I did choose at that point in time in my life. I did not want to enlist. I did not want to spend any more time than I needed to in the military. I knew it was a calculated risk, if you were, but that was my decision at that point in time. I still remember back, and it was very difficult leaving my family. When I was drafted, I was sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey. Again, 21 years old. It was somewhat surprising to me that everybody in my unit was 18 years old, or they seemed even younger. So I was the old guy at 21 in that unit. And it certainly was a mix of our country, a small town, education-wise, social, and so forth and so on. So that was a little bit of a wake up for this kid too, to get mixed into the social mix of our country. That was 1968. Times were different. It's hard to explain to people now how torn apart our country was. Every day, all that was on was the Vietnam War and protests and so forth and so on, and Walter Cronkite on every night, and of course, very graphic pictures of what was going on in Vietnam. So I'll stop there.
So you end up going to Fort Dix at 68. What was basic training like for you?
For me, physically, it was not an issue at all. Again, I was never been in such a great shape before, after years of football and so forth. So it was not a big deal, the physical part of basic training. And even at that point in time, what they can't do nowadays, drill sergeants yelling and spitting and smacking you and so forth. I think they can't do that anymore. Even that, I'll call it intimidation. Of course, they were trying to break you down and turn you into a soldier from a civilian. And even that did not intimidate me. To some degree, I took that as a challenge, and I was pretty good in the physical part of it. But I will say Fort Dix did not, or basic training, did not in any way prepare us for the real Vietnam. And I'll use one example. It was probably 10 or 15 inches of snow on the ground, and we were crawling through the woods of Fort Dix with a different type of rifle that was ever issued in Vietnam. And I'll always remember the drill sergeant saying, as we were freezing, crawling through snow, pretend you're in the jungle, pretend there's a Vietnam village over there. And that's the type of training we have. Really, they were just putting through bodies as fast as they can to get over there. And that's what they needed.
So once you got out of basic, what was your MOS?
Well, when they put that, I always remember also, I think they put a sign up on a bulletin board with your names and your MOS. And I always remember that famous Bravo 11. My MOS was at that point in time an infantryman. And despite me waving my economics degree in front of them, they said, no, here's a rifle, put that away. At that point in time, and I still am, I'm pretty easygoing. I accepted my fate. I accepted being drafted. And I said, if that's what it is, that's what it is. Of course, I was also young and dumb at that time, a little bit, or maybe not a little bit. Then let me fast forward after basic training and at the start of AIT, advanced infantry training, one day in formation. And of course, the age old saying is never volunteer in the military. But one day in formation, they asked, could anybody type here? Well, I can do about 8 to 9 minutes, or 8 to 9 words a minute, because I had it in high school with one finger pecking around. So I said, well, if this is gonna get me out of a march or a run, I'll volunteer. So I said, I can type, Sarge. Ended up the company clerk was sick for a day or two, and they just needed somebody to push some typewriter buttons a little bit. But it ended up that the company clerk never came back. And and here's the luck and fate of life in the Army and the military. My MOS was changed from an infantryman to a clerk typist. And I always tell people, if you've seen the movie MASH, I was Radar, the company clerk. So how lucky I was at that point in time. I was so lucky thinking that I was going to be permanent party. Again, at this point, I had almost 6 months into Fort Dix. I figured, well, as company clerk, I just may stay here. And I got married. I took my lovely wife, now of 53 years, consecutive years married. Married her in June of that year and took her to Fort Dix for her honeymoon. That was quite an experience for both of us. And I thought I was going to be permanent party, and we settled into our first little lousy off-base apartment and our first little TV, and newly married. And then it turned out approximately 4 or 5 months after that, I got my orders for Vietnam, which surprised both of us. She said, you promised. I said, well, I thought we were going to stay here. I will tell a quick story, because when I got my orders for Vietnam, it turned out the first sergeant, and any of the people in the military know a first sergeant or top has more power than anybody in his local unit. For some reason, he liked me, and he always called me Saul, not Sal. Saul, I can get you out of going to Vietnam. I said, Top, what are you talking about? And tops could do anything. They can borrow and trade and bargain and all this stuff. He said, I have a friend. They always have friends. I have a friend at the hospital. If you go on sick leave, you get you to the hospital. This friend will make sure you're there for a week. You will miss your orders. All this convoluted thing about going to a hospital and pretending you're sick. And I'll still remember. And I never told my wife this story until about 15 years later. And she's still mad at me for this. But I said, I can't do it, Top. I can't do this convoluted pretend thing. I can't look in the mirror in my future and say, this is what I did to get out of Vietnam. At this point in time, of course, people were going to Canada. People were shooting themselves in the foot. People were doing anything to not go to Vietnam. And I wasn't trying to be Rambo or anything. I just said, I can't do that. He accepted that, and I accepted that. I didn't tell my wife at that point in time. Then just before I left, there was one more opportunity to get out of Vietnam. And I know it could have been the worst decision of my life. It could have cost me my life. But they said, if you sign up for another, a couple of years, and you become a drill sergeant, we can keep you here and you will not go to Vietnam. Well, being a drill sergeant and yelling and stamping on people and breaking them down, it's not my character. It's not my personality. I could not do that. I could not be a drill sergeant. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that too. I said, once again, I just can't do it. And off I went. And of course, leaving our family, leaving my wife, saying goodbye to friends and family, and off we go to 6,000 miles away to a country with everything going on of protest. And of course, at that time, nobody knew why we were going, what we were going to do there, what's going to happen. It was a very very difficult time at that.
So then you got your orders to Vietnam, and you told me before we started recording this that they sent you to Cam Ranh Bay. And I'm familiar with Cam Ranh Bay because that's where when I went in order to get to Tuiwa, we flew into Cam Ranh Bay, and from there went on to my base. But I remember seeing that sprawling base, but there was more to it than just what I saw, because I saw the Air Force side of it, but there was also the Army side, and I believe also the Navy had a portion. So
They
it was
did.
kind of,
They did. Yeah.
so it was kind of the joint base that they have now in the military before that was in vogue. So you arrive at Cam Ranh Bay. Let's have you talk a little bit about what it was like when you first got to Cam Ranh and what your job was going to be, and how the different portions of that huge complex operated.
Well, Larry, I'll back up just a bit. We landed actually at was it Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon. And one of the many, many memories, but of course, that very, very long flight, 6,000 miles and so forth, full of just soldiers on a plane, and we're all having our own private thoughts and concerns and so forth. I always remember that flight. I always remember landing, and many soldiers will say they also remember when they opened that door, you got that blast of hot Vietnamese air. And that's a memory in my thing. I also remember being, again, a dumb rookie, when they put us in the bus off of the plane, and the bus had all these wires on the windows. Stupidly, I asked, why is the windows wired? And one of the guys turned around and said, "You dumb whatever." He said, "That's so they don't throw grenades in the bus." I said, "Okay, welcome to Vietnam." When I got to Cam Ranh Base, it was a massive sprawling base. And of course, I was very, very lucky, no matter how difficult and hard the year was in so many ways, emotionally and so forth. I never, ever forgot or will forget that I was not crawling around in the jungle. We did live we lived like, I'll call it animals. We lived in a little hooch on basically the Army base was one massive sand dune. There was no dirt, there was no grass, it was just sand. Our windows in our hooch was 10 by 10, hooch mean that's our cabin, if you will, where we lived. Just had no glass, of course. It just had screens on 2 windows on the side, and we lived constantly, for 11 months and 2 weeks with sand everywhere, in our bed, in our shoes, just everywhere. Although I remember, again, throwing my shoes at various large rodents, insects, and so forth. It just wasn't a very great place to live, but I was not crawling around the jungle. So at that point, I did not complain, if you will. Cam Ranh Base was, we were rocketed occasionally, about every week or so. And I sometimes tell the story, it seemed like every payday on Friday, that night, the Vietnamese would get their pay and go back in the mountains and shoot rockets into our base. We did go on alert a number of times. Even though I was a clerk, you still had issued a rifle and put out on guard duty and so forth. And that's a unique experience when it's so dark and you're carrying a loaded, at that time it was an M14. And you just wonder, could you really shoot somebody if you had to? At least that thought you have about 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're seeing all kind of things in the dark. But luckily, we never had to do that. I also remember the first time that a rocket came relatively close, maybe 50 yards, 70 yards from where I was. And again, I was a rookie at that time in Vietnam. Everybody else is diving in their bunker, which is just a culvert with sandbags. And I stood there for a minute trying to think, why are they shooting at me? What did I do? And dumb thing, until somebody grabbed me and shoved me in the bunker too. And that's why a lot of rookies in Vietnam, that was the highest rate of being killed, because you didn't know what was going on until you learned and hopefully didn't learn the hard way. But the heat, I still remember that heat every day. And it was not an easy living, but I was very, very lucky, no question about it. My duties were basically, I was a clerk, a typist, if you will, cutting orders for people. And at one point in time, we actually, for the last 6 months of my duty there, had the midnight till 8 a.m. shift, which was kind of unique because then we got to cover our hooch totally, all the windows and everything. We didn't have to go to formation in the morning. Usually we got done with our work early and slept a little bit. And then we had almost the rest of the day to, quote, go play. And go play means we would barbecue. We would borrow a deuce and a half, a large truck of the Army, or we would confiscate one. We would go down to the beach. We did things that were fun. A lot of my memories of Vietnam were fun things with your buddies. You became lifelong buddies with a number of people. I also remember nearby, and I'll tell the story now of, you didn't know at that point in time. I came back from Vietnam all in one piece, all my toes and fingers. But then 20, 25 years later, I learned I had friendly fire, if you will, and was Agent Orange. And I had a CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, caused by Agent Orange, which was a very powerful chemical that they sprayed all over the damn place to defoliate a jungle. And you can only imagine how powerful that is if they sprayed that in, I don't know, 7 or 10 days, a triple canopy jungle is gone forever. It was not environmentally safe, let's just put it that way. But that was friendly fire. And, that's just the way the cards were played at that point in time. Vietnam was also difficult, again, even though I was relatively safe where I was. It was so hard being isolated. People forget the times. We were in a police state. We listened to the Vietnam radio, which was Army radio. We got Army newspaper. There was no other communication other than getting letters, of course, from home, goodie boxes from home where somebody would put a newspaper in there, or when a new person came in, you'd milk them for all you can. Or what the heck's going on? We knew all the turmoil that was going on in America, but we really didn't realize how intense it was. Things like Kent State and riots and assassinations. You just didn't know or understand fully the turmoil our country was in at that point in time. Of course, we learned that when we got back to real America. I got out early, if you will, meaning 11 months and 2 weeks and a couple of days instead of 12-month tour. I should back up a little bit. I did have an R&R in Hawaii and met my wife. And that was both so bittersweet. It was the best week of my life. And of course, leaving there was the worst time of my life. To go back to Vietnam from Waikiki Beach was pretty stressful for her and for me. But seeing what we call the real world at that point in time, where nobody cared, nobody cared about what was going on in Vietnam. Just they either didn't want to know or didn't care about it.
Well, let me stop you first. Let me stop you for a second and just to touch on R&R. For anybody that watches this in the future, a lot of people don't understand what R&R was and where guys could go. And as you said, and I assume this is across the board in all of the, from I-Corps all the way down to the Mekong, that Hawaii was always reserved for the married guys so that they can meet their family. And then the other places for R&R like Bangkok and Singapore and Hong Kong, that's where the single guys would go and they would put in for R&R there. Was that the same for you? And was there any kind of an issue trying to get R&R in Hawaii?
No issue except for the usual military. You never know what's going to happen. For example, I think it was 2 weeks before I was going to Hawaii, and of course I was counting down the days, the hours. They had some type of inspection, I forget, lieutenant colonel or somebody came by, and my hair was too long. Now here you are fighting a war, and here they are being nitpicky about stuff like that, but that's the military. And literally, he said to his fellow who's taking the notes, make sure he gets a haircut or he's not going to Hawaii. Somehow he knew I was going R&R. So those are the kind of things that, and even when you got to I think we flew out of Saigon, Tansanut base, even when you got there, you're with hundreds, if not hundreds and hundreds of other GIs. You just never knew until that plane was off the ground that it was really going to happen. So that was stressful until you were in the air. But it was a great week. It was so difficult. My wife saw me leave first. I didn't get to see her leave. And she, of course, went back to Buffalo, New York at that point in time. Certainly never forget that.
Yeah, the other thing to point out about R&R is, although in the military, they covered your transportation, but for your family, that was on your dime. So you had to come up with the money for your wife to fly to Hawaii and back. How difficult was that on your salary? Because as I recall, our salaries weren't that much back then.
No, well, we were going to make it happen no matter what, that's for sure. But I do remember, I was saying, I think I gave my wife, here's certain places where either the military could stay or we got great military discounts or something. Basically, there were 2.5-star hotels. And we did a lot of planning on all this. It turned out when we got there, she said, listen, when I made my plans for the flight, and I told the lady where we were going and everything, and the lady said, lady, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Stay at someplace nice. So we didn't have the money, but somehow she came up with, we stayed at I forget where it was now. One of the nice hotels right on Waikiki Beach. And she was right. Instead of staying in a Hotel 6, we went to a great place and a wonderful memory. But well, she's been right ever since. So do it the right way. If you can, of course.
Sounds like a good husband, to listen to your wife.
Well, like I said, 53 consecutive years.
Now, although you were a clerk and you were stationed on the Army base at Cameron, did you ever have opportunities to get off the base or to go out at all?
Interesting question, because once again, when I told my wife some of the things we did, she said she just wanted me to stay in my room and hide under the bed for 11 months. Yeah, we had an opportunity. We took every opportunity we can. We had an opportunity to go out with the Navy on some boats, and we went around the coast and so forth. We had an opportunity once, I forget, there was a convoy of trucks going, I forget where, maybe 50 clicks or 40 miles down the road. That wasn't the smartest thing to do, but I said, yeah, I'll go, let's go. We lived in a 10 by 10 hooch. All you saw was sand, and you wanted to get out of that as much as you can. And we did have the opportunity to go to, I always said it would make a great Marriott resort, Cameron Bay Beach area. That was about it, of course, other than going to the R&R.
So you finish your time in Vietnam and head back home, and you still have some time to serve. What was it like coming home? That's an interesting question for all veterans of this era.
Extremely hard to describe. Now, when I left Vietnam, I'll just add, I was 23 years old when I left Vietnam. And once again, the average age of a Vietnam soldier was probably 18 and a half, maybe 19, but at 23 years old, they call me Pops, which is kind of strange at that point in time. Coming home, I'll just add one other thing, that the memory of my wife wrote letters every day, just about. I wrote every chance I could get. It was the only communication we had. I'll interject, there was something called a Mars call, which you were able to call home. I think you had two opportunities, and it was shortwave radio. It wasn't really a phone call. And when you got on this Mars call, you had everything you said, you had to say over, and then it was transferred to shortwave radios, and finally got 6,000 miles to Buffalo, New York. We were looking so forward to talking to each other for the first time in, I think, 9 months or something. But that call was so frustrating because you had to say, I love you, over. And she would say, well, I miss you very much. No, okay, you have to say over. And we go back and forth. Meanwhile, there's 50 guys behind you waiting in line. I think you only had, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes at the most. It was a frustrating call, kind of, because you got teased that there was a real world back there, and you couldn't talk the way you wanted to. We still talk about the frustration of that call. But she would write letters every day and number them. And they took, I don't know, 2 weeks to come or more. And I would get a pile of letters at some point in time. And there in the pile would be letter number 23, letter number 17, letter number 26. And it made for some interesting things. If you read one letter and it said, well, the cat died, and I'm thinking, what cat? Then you got a letter that was written prior to that and said, I've got a cat. Even going back and forth with letters, there was this frustration. And Vietnam was, of course, it was physical for those that had a really difficult time, but emotionally, it was very difficult. It also was a time of, and people forget the times, it was a time of racial unrest. There was too much drugs, Vietnam. There was too much alcohol. There was, in the Army at that point in time, there was no such thing as you shouldn't drink all the alcohol you can every chance you get. There was a lot of collateral damage of people injured by accidents and doing stupid things, playing with weapons. And I always remember the 4th of July, when everybody shot every weapon they had up in the air. You're just kind of, what the hell? So we got home, of course, I flew into the base in Seattle. Every veteran tells a story of waiting for what we call the freedom bird to finally lift off, and you knew you were out of there. Everybody was counting down the last month, the last days, hoping that nothing would happen, that you could get on that plane and get home. Luckily, I was able to do that. When I was on that base, and I'll always remember his words, there was a sergeant or whoever said, you take off that uniform before you're flying off to the East Coast of Buffalo. And I really didn't fully understand. And I said, why, Sarge? He said, you'll find out. So I got some civilian clothes, like he told me to. And I did find out when I did wear my uniform. There was such anger. There was either anger on one end of the scale, or we don't give a damn where you were and what you did and who cares. On the other end of the scale, or even question of why did you go? And when I tell people I was drafted, well, my options were go to Vietnam, go to Canada, or go to jail. Young folks today don't quite understand those options. So it did hurt. It did hurt. Today I wear a Vietnam veteran hat. I wouldn't put a hat like that on for probably over 15 years or more when I got back. You just wanted to put everything behind you. You certainly didn't bring it up. If somebody did bring it up, you were very careful about, are they gonna get in my face about something? And the fact that I did my duty. I did my duty. I served in the military. I was proud of that. But when people either get in your face or have anger about what you did, you question that pride sometimes. I certainly don't to any degree, and I never did. Even now I work for some veterans, volunteer organizations. I'm proud of being a veteran now. I always was, except when you came back, you just buried it. You just buried it. But that was a long time ago. our country was different. Vietnam tore our country apart in so many ways. I was reading recently, and I happened to catch the dates, and I realized the week before I left to Vietnam, there was a protest of, I think, 200,000 people in Washington. And I honestly don't even remember that. But when you go off to a country 6,000 miles away with the situation of what you're leaving, and people questioning why you're going, you shouldn't going, and it's such a waste. I'm mad at now. I do a lot of reading and so forth. I'm mad at politicians. I'm mad at Washington. I'm mad at generals. I'm not mad at Vietnam. In some ways, again, everybody, I usually I feel strongly, nobody came back from Vietnam the same, either physically, emotionally, mentally, maturity-wise. Nobody came back the same. I thought I came back with all my parts, except for this Agent Orange thing, which reared its ugly head. But I came back from Vietnam stronger, I think, emotionally and mentally, because you had to be tough to just get through it emotionally and mentally. It got my priorities straight. To this day, I try not to get frustrated with things because I remember how lucky I am to be here. And I remember those soldiers that did not come back. So I'm not going to get upset about something that just, there used to be a saying in Vietnam, it don't mean nothing. And then I try to remember that for minor things that might irritate you at this point in time.
Exactly. Do you have any other recollections that you want to talk about?
Well, to me, it's a story, but in a strange way, Vietnam, well, like everything in life, but Vietnam determined what career I would have. And here I am sitting here 50 years later, now retired from a well over 40-year career in small town community banking and finance. But I say this because when I did graduate from college with an economics degree, I could not get a job. I remember the first 3 interviews I had with various companies, and they literally said outright, we would have hired you, but we know that you're going to be drafted. And you sit there and say, gee, that sounds a little discriminatory, but okay. And after 3 times that happened, I gave up going to interviews. But there was at that time some type of a civil service test for college graduates. I'm not sure if they have that anymore. So I said, well, maybe the government won't discriminate. And I took the civil service test, and depending upon your score, various government agencies may or may not say, we'd like to talk to you. I was looking forward to getting some really fun, maybe the Secret Service will call me or whatever. I could carry a gun or something. No, I got letters from the IRS and the Social Security Agency. But I did get one of these letters from the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which I never heard of because I never had a bank account. And I joked that the brochure said fun, travel, adventure. I took the job. I became a federal bank examiner for 12 years. I had a job to come back to after I came back from Vietnam. When I took the job, it only lasted, I think, 6 months, but I had a job to come back to. And I never thought I'd continue in that area, but I did. And then it evolved into a small community bank that, again, I've been there over 40 years. So you never know, fickle fate. But Vietnam determined my career for me. I appreciate, again, doing this. Every Vietnam soldier, no matter where they serve, that doesn't matter. Every veteran has a story. Every veteran remembers their buddies, remembers the good times, remembers the military BS and so forth and so on. But I believe it makes a young person stronger, more mature. And then there's this thing called service to your country that I believe in. Today, it's a different world, of course. I get sometimes frustrated when folks don't understand the history of the sacrifices that were made, whether it's World War I, World War II, my father, World War II, Korea. I get frustrated when somebody 32 years old says, what was Korea? What was Vietnam? Because they just we don't learn from history. And I wish we would, but apparently that's not politically correct these days. I try to pass on the lessons learned and freedom is not free message as much as I can to talking with youth or people with the volunteer organizations that I belong to.
Well, thank you so much, Sal.
Okay.
I appreciate it. From one Vietnam vet to another, welcome home.
Welcome home. Thank you, sir.